This morning, I just want to get right into it because I want to speak a message. It's just a story of promise. I wish I had a better title, but that's it. This is going to be a story of promise, and I want it to be something that's going to be a blessing to you. We're going to be working through 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. It is a great passage. It's a story about the widow's oil. And it's just an incredible story that I pray will reach your heart and some minds today. In this passage, it just says, the wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor's coming, and he's trying to take my 2 boys to be his slaves." Can you feel the passion? Can you feel the hurt in this poor woman's heart? Elisha replied to her, "How can I help? Tell me what you have in your house." "Your servant has nothing at all," she said, "except a small jar of olive oil." Elisha said, "Go around, ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour oil into all the jars. And as each is filled, put it to one side." She left him, and she shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your son can live on what is left." And that's the passage this morning. I'm excited to preach about this morning because this is actually my favorite passage of Scripture. I mean, I love this piece, and as I go on in the message, you're going to hear maybe some pieces of why this is so important a story to me, but I just love everything about it. First of all, it starts with a very Disney beginning, right? It has all the pieces of Disney right here because it says the parent's dead, like dad's dead. Bam! Like, how much more Disney can you get than that, right? It seems like if you want to wish upon a star, you have to have a dead parent. That's just the way it goes. So this is really a tough beginning. I remember watching one of the Disney films, and you might be reminiscing some of them in your mind right now, but I remember when Finding Nemo came out, and we're sitting in the theater, my whole family, and it opens up, beautiful little family, and then all of a sudden barracudas just start flying through this area and eating all the fish. And after the wreckage, my wife says out loud in the theater, "Did they just kill the mother?" Like, she was so offended and upset about that. And it's true, it just has all those pieces about it, and that's just the Disney beginning. But then the end of this story is powerful. I mean, at the end, it's like they lived happily ever after. This is a great story. So that's what I love about it. It just grabs your heart and then gives you a real release, a real victory, just kind of a triumphant kind of moment at the end. So when you think about what's happening in this piece, it's very, very important because that sadness, that depth, is what is used and starts to make the change, the things that happen in this woman's life. Pastor Christian, when he asked me to speak this morning, I actually had this message in my mind almost 2 months ago. For some reason, God said, the next time you're called on to speak, this is the sermon. I had no idea what God was doing at the time. And for Pastor Christian, he has to think every single week about what's coming up. I get a whole 2 months, right? So it's a little easier on me when you think of it in those terms. But for whatever reason, God had placed this on my mind. And I was wondering, well, how is God going to use this? And a confirmation came last weekend when a gentleman that I had met 4 months ago came up to me and told me a tragic story. Sadly, his daughter and his granddaughter who was living with him, that daughter went home to be with the Lord. And now Grandpa's here raising his granddaughter. Can you imagine the depth, the heart of that story? And today, if you, this is somebody we're trying to help out. He wants to pay somebody for a couple days of work, and told me this morning that he's got things pretty much worked out. But we would love to hear on a welcome home card if you can help out in that, because we might need a pinch hitter. We can raise up an army here to kind of help this guy. But the depths of what's going to happen now, and there's this little 5th grade daughter that's just going to need somebody to help support, get that support to Grandpa as he goes along the way, because he was hit with this tragedy. When I was just married, 6 months into our marriage, my wife's father passed away. And it was a real tragedy. Tracy and I are the oldest in our family, so we were just married. We're young. There was kids still in the house. There was a couple daughters off to university. It was just a tragic story. And the events unfolded where I happened to be home at the time. This was back before cell phones, so we couldn't even just, call the person right away and get their attention right away. Tracy was out grocery shopping, and I get this call, heart-wrenching call. Her baby brother, Andrew, called me, and he's so upset, and he's telling me, I need you to come, please come right now. My dad, we got to look after him. There's something wrong with my dad. And I couldn't understand even who I was talking to because he was so broken up. And I finally had to say, wait, I will come. Who is this? And Andrew said, it's Andrew. And I was like, okay. And so I ran across the street. My parents lived right across the street. Tracy was out with the only car we had. And I tore off down the road to go be a part of just a nightmare, really. It was very, very sad. And then we all ended up at the hospital, and the news about Dad had gone home to be with the Lord. And it's one of those events in somebody's life that nobody makes it out, squeaky clean. It's just tough. And how do you get through something like that? And I can't speak to every one of her siblings' experiences, but I know what was happening for Tracy. So she was a trooper. She toughed it out every day, tried to be, she had her moments of tears and what have you during the day, but she really kind of held them in, and then they turned into like night terrors and sleepless nights and things like that started to happen for her. And so just there trying to be loving and comforting and all that, and only married to her for 6 months. And I'm just a 21-year-old kid. Like, the fact that I was in all these scenes with her family, it's just like, I was just an idiot kid, really, at 21, right? But I was there. I was trying to be as helpful as I could. And with my wife and having those nightmares, one funny incident happened. One night she woke up and she was like, get him off me. And she's brushing her body, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm trying to help her out. It's dark. I'm brushing whatever off her body. And then I just said, I think we're good, Tracy. I think we got it. And she said, oh, okay, thank you. And she went right back to sleep. And I'm laying there, heart pounding, like, what just happened here? So I asked her in the morning, what was that all about? Like, what happened in your night, in your sleep there? And she said, well, I had this horrific nightmare that there was spiders all over my body. And so I said, oh, okay. So me as her husband, I'm such the protector, right? I helped her wipe away all those invisible spiders. It's just, thank you. I'm your man. If you have invisible spiders in your house, give me a call. We'll take care of them. But it's incredible the impact that something like this can have on a person, on their body, and on their psyche, right? It just, I've heard people that lose a spouse like this can go into such deep depression and just sadness. So sad, I don't even want to get out of bed. And that had to have been this woman's story. And probably what got her out of bed most days, was, I have boys in my house and I got to get up. I got to take care of things and keep the family rolling. And that was probably all that got her up sometimes, because it is that dark and that hard to go through. And then on top of it, it's not just about the dad died, but on top of it, now we got this creditor guy that's showing up and he wants his money or he's going to take her boys. Like, how evil is that, right? When you think about it, just what is going on here? This poor woman, she's just she's down on her luck, and then she's getting beat up here while she's down at the bottom. And so this creditor wants his money, and you're going to take these boys. And doesn't that sound horrible? I mean, just go with me and let's just hate this guy together. What a jerk, right? That's the least we can say about this horrible person. And just join me and let's boo this guy together, okay? Right? All right, so here's the scene. Enter the creditor. Oh, yeah, it's horrible. Boo and hiss, because he is a horrible, horrible person. I can't believe he's doing this to this woman. I've got enough social justice bone in my body that I probably wouldn't lead the troops, but I would go over in a group of people and sit down with that guy and say, listen here, what do you think you're doing? Let this family off the hook, this poor lady, her husband died, and what are you doing? But according to Jewish law and the Levitical law back then, he was owed this payment, and the sons could be a part of that payment because dad was in this credit type of situation, and back then a person could use their own service as collateral for a loan. So dad had put himself forward as, if I can't pay this thing, I'll just go into service for you. And they could be in service even up to 7 years until the year of Jubilee. And that's when all debts were paid and everybody was let free from whatever obligation they had there. So these boys were getting ready to take over for dad because it just passed down that debt to the next generation. So these boys were getting set up to go with this man to take care of whatever needs and whatever servitude that he would design for them. So when you think about it, man, 7 years, boys out of the house, and geez. Although, mom could have given in and just said, I'll see you guys in, 7 years. Maybe I'll come and visit you on the Sabbath day or something like that, right? And just kind of pass it off. Because, if you had to do the teenage years without the kids, in a different spot, might be a little bit easier. But she wasn't putting up with that. This woman was tough. This is a cool mom. Let's look at some of the things that was happening for her. Her circumstances. She, first of all, she refused fate. So there's some people that if this was happening to them, I give up. I can't do this. I'm going to, take the boys. I guess I have to deal with what I have to deal with. That would have been tough. But this woman, she was like, oh no, this isn't the way it's going to be. And I am going to try to figure out how we can fix this, how we can help, how we can get this guy paid off. So she was on that track. And her husband, it was probably a family that didn't have a lot of money because her husband being a part of the company of the prophets, a lot of translation even talks about he was a seminary student. So basically, this group of prophets with Elisha, he was training them, and they were becoming the next people that would to lead the charge of spiritual warfare throughout Israel. And so they were all a part of this. So it was either that, or they were a part of a company of prophets from the First Kings, where Jezebel and Ahab, they were killing off all the Lord's prophets and setting up their new religion for the prophets of Baal. But these guys all ended up in this situation and doing the work of students and becoming prophets themselves. So it's a very interesting dynamic happening here. And if you've ever talked to a seminary student, they really don't have a lot of money. It's really rough. If you ever want to hear stories of God's providence, you can talk to somebody, any pastor, about what was it like when you went through seminary. Oh my goodness, there's so many stories we could tell you about how God moved and directed in people's lives and what they did there. I remember being in seminary and some of the things that Tracy and I were doing. We ended up in a situation where we went off to live in a dormitory, a married dormitory situation, didn't have a job, trying to figure out how God's going to take care of us. And it was every so often, maybe 3-4 days apart, there'd be a knock on our door, and we'd come out and somebody had left us groceries. And it was an odd group of groceries in this bag. There was like 2 potatoes and a couple carrots and some form of meat. Sometimes it was just Spam. We fried it and we ate it. We did our thing, but that was just what was happening at the time, and that was the depths of some things that we were coming. And every time it would happen, man, I would run to the door and I would run down the hallway. I was trying to find who just dropped this off, and I still to this day don't know who did it, but it was something that was at our door each and every time in that moment. So to know that a seminary student was in debt, yes, that makes sense. That tracks. But here we are. She was like, it doesn't matter what he was dealing with. She refused that fate. Here's the next thing she did. She cried out for help. Oh, man, when you're in a situation like this, you're going to cry out for help. God, please help me do something here and allow me to be free of this. And so she went to the only person or the best person she knew that could help her. She went to Elisha. I don't know what it's like for you, but there are certain people in your life that speak truth and wisdom. And man, I don't know who that is for you, but find you an Elisha. And when things get tough, when you don't know what to do, when it feels like the whole bottom's dropped out, God can do something. Because your story might not be that there was a tragedy as big as death, but there is something that is weighing you down and pulling you down and keeping you down. And you can find help. You can find peace. You can find something if you call out for help. That's what she was like, this can't be this way. I'm going to talk to Elisha. Now, Elisha, being one of the prophets back at this time, the only scriptures that were written were the law and the prophets, or the laws actually at that time. So the prophets, many times they had some insight, and God would, kind of direct some things through them, and they would help people find answers from God in that place. And at that same time, scripture would be written because most of the Old Testament is the prophets, and that's just all there is to it. So she cried out for help, and she found Elisha. The next thing she did was she gave of her own resources. I find it curious that Elisha said, well, what do you got? What do you have in your house? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, it's not what she has. Like, let's give her stuff, right? That would be, the good, wholesome Christian thing to do. Like, just everybody give her money. Like, this was like if I had $1 million kind of thing, right? Let's just give this woman all the money she needs, or if I won the lottery. And that might be like a quick fix, but it's not the fix. That's not what God had intended for her life. But he wanted to know what her resources are. So she said, all I have is this little bit of oil. That might have been the only precious, expensive thing in her house at that time, but she was willing to give it up. So that's the circumstances we find this woman in. Let's look at her obedience, because this is the thing that starts to make sense and starts to pull her out of this situation that she's in. So the first thing she did was she followed detailed instructions. I find it so interesting that Elisha said to her, this is what I want you to do. What do you have in your house? She said, got this little bit of oil. And he said, okay, let's take that oil. I want you to go borrow a bunch of jugs. then I want you to take your sons. I want you to go into your house. I want you to close the door, and I want you to start pouring the oil into all these jugs, and make sure you have a bunch of jugs. And she followed those instructions. Isn't that incredible? I mean, that's great. She was like, this is simple. This is something I can do. Sometimes it's just about I need to mark down what's happening here and how I can get to a place because God has a specific instruction for me. I think of this moment here with Elisha, and if you've ever been to Financial Peace University with Dave Ramsey, it gets very specific and instructional about here's how you get out of your financial stress and burdens. And it starts like Dave Ramsey got his stuff from Elisha. I'm just telling you that right now because it all starts with, well, what resources can you pull together and be ready for whatever emergency? And then the second step is what Elisha told this woman, pay off your debts. And then the rest of the money is for you guys to live, and you have your resources now, and then you live responsibly and see what God can do in generating income for you and even going into savings. So it's just lots of details there, but I encourage you, if you're in that spot where there's financial burden, this is a great program, and I'm telling you, it came from Elisha. The next thing she did was she believed God could multiply her efforts. Wow, now that's where faith comes in, man. She must have thought, seems so crazy, all these detailed instructions you're giving me, and I'm supposed to just like pour oil out of this little jug, and then it's going to fill all these jugs you're telling me about? Like that took faith to say, I'm willing or I'm ready, I can do this. And the truth of the matter is we have a God that is into the multiplying business. Like he doesn't want us to just stay in this place. He multiplies, and he will use the resources that you give to him. I'm ready to surrender this to you, Lord. I don't know what it is in your life. I know what it is in my life, and I'm ready to surrender and give that to the Lord so he can use it for his glory, and he can multiply. What do I mean by multiply? There's a story in the Bible. Jesus took 2 small fish and 5 loaves, and he fed thousands. And then from a rock, he refreshed and gave water to all of his people in the wilderness. And then he one time took a young exile girl, and he used that girl and giving of her life to however God will use it, and he rescued the whole nation from destruction and despair. I'm talking about Esther and how she became the queen. And so God could take the little things and he can multiply them. I can tell you from experience that the simplicity of me giving just a little portion of what God has blessed me in my life, man, he makes the other portion stretch. And all of a sudden, the things that I think, I don't know if I can give to the Lord, oh, yes, I can, because this is what I can give to the Lord. And then he multiplies what I have left, and I'm able to use it. This is the next thing about her obedience. She invited her sons into the work. This is a great instruction because her kids were able to come in there. And I don't know the full purpose of shut the door, but if you've raised boys and you're trying to get their attention, you got to take out distractions. And so there was no distraction. They were going to be praying and they were going to be working together. And she needed the room to be fully concentrated on what God was doing in the work there. And can you imagine, she started pouring into one jug, and then it filled up, and she was like, okay, give me another one, and another pour. And okay, boys, give me another one, all the way until she said, bring me another one. And they were like, that's it, Mom, we got it all covered. But can you imagine what was going on in those kids' lives when they watched the oil fill jar after jar? And they watched God doing something here. It's important that our kids get to see God at work in their lives. And so she was inviting them in because this isn't something God's just blessing me, that he is doing this for us. And I don't know if she had the information and given it out to the boys about what was going to happen and what this creditor was doing, but whether she did or she didn't, her boys got to see God work over and over and fill every one of those jugs. I tell you, this church is blessed by people who are working for the Lord, and they've invited their families in on this. Do you know that? There's such a blessing in having your family see God do something in their lives. I would love to be able to just say my children followed the Lord because they listened to their dad. That's not what happened. I think they did from time to time, but I'll tell you, they got more out of what is happening in their life for the Lord because they learned to work for the Lord and see how great and how good the Lord is. The psalmist said, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." So that means it's not just about instruction, listening, and reading something to the kids, but it's about them getting to see for themselves. Tasting is a very different experience. So they got to taste and to see how good the Lord is. And this church gets to see and taste how good the Lord is, family after family in our community. Starting with our senior pastor, our lead pastor, sorry. We don't say senior anymore. He's lead pastor. But his family, they're serving the Lord here, man. He's up here on stage, but you know what else is happening? His beautiful wife, Stephanie, and 2 of their kids are working back in the children's ministry, and depending on the day, maybe her role is even more important than Christian's role up here, right? She's back there serving the Lord and doing that stuff. He has a couple of the kids with him. On stage here this morning, we were blessed by the Falk family, who they've got all their kids are working in ministry and do some things around here, and they're getting to taste and see how good the Lord is. And they're going to get to experience that for themselves, because it's not my faith that's bringing them to the Lord. It's going to be their faith in action that does something greater and more powerful for him. So it's important, man, invite your kids into ministry and the work of the Lord. The next thing is about the blessing and how that was happening. So God has a bigger plan. So we may think, well, here's what needs to happen. Let's just get this creditor paid off and be done. But God had much more in store for this woman. And it involved process, because it wasn't just a one and done kind of deal. Although we may hear a need and we may think, this is what we got to do. Just let's take care of this right away and immediately, right? We want it right then and now. But God had something bigger in mind for them. He wanted to not only supply their need for what was happening, but what was going to happen in the future, because this widow's raising of this boys weren't done right at that moment when they got rid of the creditor, but it went on and on. So she had some monies that she had to bring. She had some income to bring into the house now, and God had the bigger plan. And it took process, it took time, and she was willing to take it. The next thing about the blessing is that she redeemed her sons. Oh, man. Isn't it awesome when your kids follow the Lord and then they come to the Lord, and you can see all those things happening in their life? I just imagine the moments of those boys watching this oil just get poured over and over, man. It was the moments of surrender for them, because they were like, well, look what God is doing. And so she redeemed them. She got to pay off this creditor. He was done. I know we booed the creditor earlier, but can we cheer for this woman? Like, come on, enter the widow. Woo! Yeah, girl. She got this done. She took care of it. She got to redeem her sons. The next thing of the blessing is she and her sons now had a business together. When you read the story and you think the happily ever after at the end, in verse 7, it says that Elijah sent her out. He said, you go sell the oil and then pay off the creditor, and then you live on the rest, you and your sons. Now, when you read it in that short script, you think, oh, this is great. You just did all this, and then, the rest of your life you're hanging around at the house and roaming around the pool with your umbrella drink and, having good times, right? But this wasn't what was going on. These guys now started a business together because not everybody was just showing up the house to get oil and buy from this woman. There was probably process and time. There was a business startup here. She probably had to show up in the markets with a stand and try to sell her oil to whoever would take it. She probably had to set up payment arrangement with this creditor and said, look, I know we got a debt with you and we're going to figure this all out, but are you willing to do this? I'm sure she had to figure out a whole bunch of stuff. But in the end, she was able to get all this set up so that they could work and they could have a livelihood together, because that's what God wanted to do. He wanted to bless them with something that's just not for today, but for later. And sometimes that takes process and time. And are we willing to do it? Are we ready to do it? Are we ready to be obedient for Him for that blessing? So here's what's happening and the way that we end this story, because it's about the promise. It's about promise from God. Just as the Lord took care of this woman and said, just keep pouring the oil, and she poured jar after jar with her sons, God will do the same for you. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is a promise that God is our provider. He will supply all our needs according to His riches and glory by Christ Jesus. Isn't that a great promise? Isn't that great to know that, okay, God's going to take care of my needs, and I need to rely on His promise, His attribute that He will do what He said He will do, and He's our provider. The next thing I need you to know for your life out of this story is that God is with you through the pain. My wife reminded me of this verse this past week of Psalm 38, verse 18. It just says, the Lord is with those of a brokenhearted and with those of a crushed spirit. Now think of the promise of that and how wonderful that is to hear. Man, this woman had a crushed spirit. She had a broken heart. There was all kinds of things that were happening with her, but God was with her in all of that. She wasn't alone. And she was getting supernatural guidance to go and get this stuff taken care of. Talk to Elisha. She had a lot of things happening in that moment. The last promise I want you to know about today is that God is our refuge and our strength. So above and beyond everything else, those supplying of our needs, He is there to be our refuge and strength. Psalm 91 is an incredible chapter in the Bible. Maybe for homework today, it's about going home and reading that and meditating on Psalm 91, because He is our refuge and strength. This woman couldn't have done it without the Lord, couldn't have done it without this attribute in her life and her reliance on it. And I'm telling you today, it's the same for us. We can trust in God's promises because they are true, and He's always faithful to His promises. Amen.